Good morning. Welcome. I'm Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are listening to Damn Radio. Damn glad to have you this morning, live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. Feel free to phone in. I might even answer. I don't like to answer, but sometimes I do. It just depends. And it's 573-746-8020. And I tell you what, I've been watching the Davos with interest, with a great deal of interest, in fact, because it's a topic that I enjoy. It's economics. I got my degree from the old University of Illinois. You remember Tom Cruise in Risky Business when he said at the end, "Looks like University of Illinois," when he wasn't going to get accepted to Princeton or wherever he was trying to get to, Stanford, who knows. And he had the party, and he just said, "Looks like University of Illinois." Well, that's where my economics degree and my Russian studies focus is from. And so University of Illinois, geez, it's a depressing debacle when you only get a degree from University of Illinois, not from Princeton. But I'm not Tom Cruise, so there you have it. And I didn't get to slide in to a room to Bob Seger in my undies and a shirt, although I did get to wear a flight suit on many occasions. So there you have it. And you know what? It really did work. Wearing a flight suit and, having short hair in the military and flying in a helicopter into Love Field in Dallas. Very good for your love life, I can tell you that. That is very good for your love life. And I highly recommend going out and purchasing a flight suit, buying your own helicopter, and going, or the simple version, join the military. Join up, as they say. And head to Love Field in your helicopter like I did Friday nights. I would schedule training for the pilots, and they would have to train by flying me from Fort Hood, Texas, to Love Field, Dallas, a couple-hour flight in a helicopter, hour and a half maybe. And then I would have them train on Sunday evening and fly to Love Field and just happen to hop back in the helicopter and get a ride back to... they had to train anyway, right? Geez, how are they going to be pilots without getting flight hours? That's how it worked. And since I was in charge of who got trips to Love Field, well, that's what I did, and I spent weekends in Dallas. Those were fun times. That was a great deal of fun. At any rate, that's not the topic for today. Thievery of military resources, which it really wasn't, but there you go. We're going to talk about Davos and some of the changes that are being signaled there. I truly have been watching, and I pay attention to this stuff because it's of interest to me. I hope it's of interest to you here from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio, because it should be if it isn't. The world is a-changing, and the story here in America is only what Donald Trump talked about at Davos and how he dominated the forum and stuff like that. And he spoke... I'm going to get into his speech a little bit, too. I'm not going to play any of those speeches. There's too many. But I'm going to focus on 5 of them. It's my last day of the week as far as the radio program. And I won't be back till Monday. And 7:30 to 9 on Damn Radio. And you can always listen to my shows at internationalflavor.com because I save them all and upload them all up there. But of great interest to me has been the speeches, at least the key speakers. Donald Trump is a keynote speaker. I'm going to focus on several more. Yesterday, I told you a little bit about, if you were with me yesterday morning, you already know what I'm talking about. We listened to Carney's speech from the Canadian guy from Davos, his speech at Davos. And whether you like the guy or not, whether you agree with me or not, whether you agree with his politics or not, he did something almost nobody does ever in the world. He told the truth out loud. No political spin, no nothing. No emotion, no ideology, no structural. You can go out to YouTube and listen to his speech directly. It was a great speech. And, well, for the guy, I've never been real impressed with him. Not ideological, but structural. He said the quiet part that nobody ever says, he said it very plainly, the rules-based, alleged international order worked because everybody pretended that it worked. Everybody knew the rules were applied unevenly, he said. Everybody knew the strongest U.S., the Euro, any high-level allies exempted themselves from such rules when it's convenient. But the middle powers, countries like Canada, they say they went along to get along. They were an integral part of it. The deep state BS that they put the sign in the window, as he called it, complied and hoped that their protection of the system would last. And Carney said that bargain was over. So today we're not going to relitigate that. If you want to hear that, go back and listen to his speech on YouTube. Mark Carney, YouTube, full speech, Davos. Check that out. But that's assumed knowledge for today's dive into more. Today is what happens after, in his allegations, we put the sign in the window, but that sign was taken down because Davos this year doesn't show us a new world order. It shows 5 views of the reaction of the collapse of the old world order. And that's what this show's about. We're going to walk through what leaders actually said in their own words, what they thought they were, when they thought they were speaking to power, not to voters. Because remember, this isn't for the voters. This is for big money. This is for people who pay attention to macroeconomics worldwide and how the system is going to work. And Donald Trump was blunt. And these other people we're I'll get to each one of them. First, we're going to hear from China. We're going to talk about China, not the cartoon version, not the Twitter version, but the actual institutional voice of China. Calm, restrained, very boring almost, on purpose. The Chinese vice premier did not come to sell a BRICS, let's everybody switch to something else. He didn't pound the table. He didn't threaten anyone. The Chinese don't do that. He warned quietly what happens when the rules die, like we're watching right now. And what he didn't say is as important as what he did say, okay? But we're going to go to Europe also, and Europe is very split. Very split. Emmanuel Macron sounds like a man who finally understands that, values won't stop tariffs and speeches don't stop tanks. He isn't romantic anymore. He isn't pretending openness is protection. He is building, hopefully, an armor for the French people. That's what he's trying to show. Ursula von der Leyen is the same idiot she always is. I mean, she's the same old, everything's great. We're the EU and everything is fine. And, daddy's here. She didn't say that, but she did. I mean, nothing. She's talking about deals and celebrating process and how it works and how the EU is there. She avoided Trump, avoided blame, avoided power. If Macron is talking about surviving, she's talking about, oh, geez, we're still powerful. She's nuts. They're crazy. Then when we go to Finland, this is reality. Okay, this is where it gets some interesting. Alexander Stubb is what's happening when you live next to real power. Okay, real history, real consequences. Remember, that area of the world that is Europe, especially Eastern Europe, has been overrun for centuries. They have centuries, age-old disputes. Trust me, Russia didn't forget World War II. And Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, all those places that were overrun by both sides as Russia defended basically the world and came through and kind of sucked in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. They haven't forgotten. And trust me, Russia hasn't forgotten. The rest of the world seems to forget that Germany was the dominant part in that and not Russia. That Russia is the enemy and they always have been. Well, that's true for certain areas of the world. The Polish-Lithuanian Empire, for sure, if you know your history and you go back 500, 600 years, they were always at each other's throats. They've hated each other for centuries. and so Finland is right there in the middle of it. Now, Finland, well, not in the middle, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. That would have been interesting to find somebody from there, but they never showed up. They, they're as dumb as a von der Leyen. But after all that, only after here, restraint, fear, denial, these kind of things, and realism, do we get to Trump. Because Trump makes no sense until you hear him last. You got to hear him last. He's the keynote speaker. He spoke an hour and 10 minutes or something, maybe longer. And it was a good speech. It was a decent speech, but all Trump all the time. He's not wrong about the leverage that he levels against the world. He's wrong about the consequences. What happens next? He thinks he's saving the planet. Yeah, I disagree, and maybe I'll convince you. I don't care if I do or don't, truthfully. It's not my job to convince you. It's my job to give you alternative thought process, to let you think a different way, perhaps, okay? That's that we want, this is some of the parts that Americans don't generally see. We see gas prices, which are fantastic in our favor. We don't see the scaffolding that's cracking underneath the very foundation. We don't see it. And Trump didn't end globalism. He's privatizing it. He's personalizing it. It's Trump's world right now. And he's replacing institutions with himself. And that works until it no longer works. So today, we aren't talking about personalities. We know Trump's personality. I may still talk about it because, Jesus, it takes over everything for this guy. And I don't dislike him. Remember that. I do not dislike him. I might not even dislike some of the results that he's getting worldwide, but I disagree with his methods. So we're not talking personalities. We are talking methods, and we're talking about outcomes, long-term outcomes, macro-level outcomes. China is giving warnings. Europe is bracing itself one way or the other. Middle powers are trying to get organized, and Trump is pushing hard. And alternatives are growing quietly in the background, okay? This isn't about left and right. It's about whether force produces obedience, temporarily, by the way, or creates creates exit strategies. That's Davos. After Carney. Carney was one of the first speakers, and he started the playing field. So let's get into it, okay? We're going to get into a guy's name, and I know I don't pronounce it right, but I don't speak Chinese. His name is He Lifeng, I think. And he was at Davos, okay? And he's the vice premier. And why China is going first? China is opening this sequence because China is non-emotional. When you listen to Chinese state-run people or state, the voice of the government, it is always calm. It's been calm. It's been steady for centuries. The Chinese don't come out of their territory. They just don't. When's the last time you heard about the Chinese attacking anything except stuff that we create? That, they're going to take over Taiwan. That's a dispute that we don't need to be part of. Never should have been. We started that, and we have been holding Taiwan. We have been backing a regime since World War II, basically, that is still part of China, and sometimes it goes back and forth. So China's messaging is not, here's our new world order. It's saying that if you keep on doing this the way you're doing it, there won't be one. That distinction is important because what He Lifeng actually came to do, he did not come to. He didn't come. Let's talk about what he didn't do. He didn't come to promote BRICS. He did not attack the United States or Donald Trump. He did not threaten Europe. He did not advertise yuan settlements that are growing. He did not brag about alternative structures that are being created at a record pace. He did not talk about Russia, India, Ukraine, European deals, right? These are omissions that are important. He didn't come to say we're taking over in the global south. Those omissions are deliberate, okay? Instead, he came to talk about the moral high ground, which is world stability, to sound like the last adult in the room, insisting that the floor stop shaking before the freaking building collapses. That is not weakness, friends and neighbors. That is positioning, and it's global positioning, okay? Here's what he talked about. Trade wars, he said this, trade wars are not policy disputes. They are damage to the system. Trade wars hurt everyone. This is one of the most important parts of his speech. He said, he didn't say trade wars hurt China. He didn't say trade wars are unfair to us. What he said was trade wars damage the foundation of global cooperation. He emphasizes that tariffs are no longer exceptions. Sanctions are no longer extraordinary. Supply chains are now targets. Themselves are targets. Systems, not systems. That this is the world that we are living in now, that Trump is creating, by the way, but he didn't say it. He never mentioned Donald Trump. He backed it up with institutional language, World Trade Organization rules, predictability, equal treatment. As everybody know what an MFN is, MFN means most favored nation, okay? And an MFN under the World Trade Order is, if you apply this rule to one ally, you need to apply it to all the rest, basically, is how that works. And everybody wants to get this most favored nation status because that's what the World Trade Organization kind of requires, right? But Trump is blowing that up, okay? The key concept in plain English, when countries, because Trump treating everything like a company, and I'm not against that. I mean, the results, you'll see him for 3 years, but you won't see him forever because people don't like force. They don't like what's going on. But when countries stop trading under equal rules, this is the key concept that he said. Well, my phone is going crazy on me. Sorry about that. And I forgot to turn it on, did not disturb. But when countries stop trading under equal rules, they don't stop trading. That doesn't stop the trading. It means they reroute, they regionalize, and they hedge their bets. And that's what everybody's doing. That isn't ideology. That's survival. That's what they do. He never mentions the word MFN, most favored nation. But that's what he's talking about the whole time. No countries get special punishment or special privilege under the World Trade Organization rules and order. Unless you're Donald Trump, then you just do whatever you want. And people don't like that in the world. They like something they can plan upon, that they all do the same thing. I'm not saying it always went that way. I'm saying that's the physical argument that they talk about. Systems can't function if the strongest ignore the constraints that are placed upon them by the things. So China did not say, and why that is the point. This is where a lot of Western listeners might miss what China is signaling. China didn't say the dollar is finished, BRICS will replace, we're going to settle everything in yuan, we're building parallel world orders. Why? Because the forum isn't appropriate for that. These are the rich people. This is where you don't sell alternatives there. You're establishing your own legitimacy, and China wants the room to think. They sound reasonable. They sound patient. They sound institutional. That makes future divergence look like a necessity, right? Not a rebellion against the world order. They're saying, well, if you treat everybody this way, if you target particular people, if you weaponize the dollar, if you do all of these things, here's the result. It's a clinical analysis. It's a doctor diagnosing a disease, right? They frame multilateralism like plumbing. It's boring. It's invisible. It's essential. He didn't romanticize. He didn't pretend that it's fair, because it's never been fair, but at least you had something steady. Trump is blowing all that up for a lot of reasons. He's basically saying, you don't tear down the bridge while you're still crossing the river. Why? Because if you name names, that lowers your argument. China is arguing above the personality layer, above what's happening layer. They're talking structure. They're talking what it's supposed to be. Chinese restraint isn't submission. They are not submitting. They're not saying, well, they're saying we're dealing with the world that we're dealt with or stuck with. And there's a bunch of people saying that. We're dealing, but in different ways. Some are ignoring it completely, which we'll get into. But China's calm tone is not because it's lacking power. It's because China trades with everybody. China plans last for decades. Remember that. They plan decades in advance. We can't plan 3 years. When Trump's gone, it all goes back to the same old thing, especially if a Democrat gets elected. Rubio stays in. They get somebody like that. It's still the same old neocon bullshit. That's what it is. If a Democrat comes in, it's almost the same thing, just a different group of winners. The high-level winners. They switched to Clintons and Obamas for the Rubios and Vances and Trump family of the world. That's what happens. And the Trump allies. The allies change. The financial allies, because the rest of us are nothing. We don't mean anything to these guys. Never did. And to the entire system. In fact, the only reasonable people that are trying to create a world structure aren't in America. The structure that they're trying to create in America is, hey, we do what we say. It's always been that way. Trump's just saying the quiet part out loud, right? China is already assuming that diversification is happening, fragmentation is well underway, and regional blocks are hardening because even Canada's doing it. I talked to you about that with Carney yesterday. So the quiet warning, here's the core. If you had to distill Hille Feng's entire speech into one sentence, it'd be, if power replaces rules completely, the rules will be replaced by exits. That's it. That's it. If power is gone or replaces the rules, if power is all there is, and they replace the rules, then the rules are going to be replaced by everybody exiting. You're not going to force us. You're going to isolate. You're going to create not revolution, not confrontation, but exit. And exits don't announce themselves. China's not announcing to the world that they're unloading hundreds of billions of U.S. debt right now. They're doing it slowly because it's not something you can do overnight. But they've been doing it every quarter to the tune of $60 to $100 billion of debt. And they used to be the largest. Pretty soon they're going to be down to nothing because they don't trust the structure. They trust nothing. And trust me, they have options. And Trump knows all this, by the way. You can, think about this. China didn't come to Davos to threaten anybody. They came to say, if you keep breaking the system, don't be surprised when people stop using it. And that ain't defiance. That's gravity. That's reality. That's clinical, And so, that is China, okay? China's saying preserve the system that there is. We know it's not applied equally, but preserve it. Carney told us yesterday that, we all knew the rules were bent to dependent upon who's using them. And we all knew that, and we never said anything. He said that. It's a great speech. He spoke the truth, Macron is next for us. And wait till you hear what this guy says. That guy's frightened. You listen to his speech, he's scared. And he ought to be. Europe, they all ought to be scared. Von der Leyen's got her head in the sand. She's her speech is almost worthless. You just, oh yeah, we're great. Yeah, I'm sure you feel that. Trump's forcing you to do whatever, and you just come in and go, yeah, we're going to do what Daddy wants. She didn't say that. That sure is what she meant. But China says, preserve the system or lose it. People aren't going to use it. That's what happened. Okay. So let's go on to France and talk about Emmanuel Macron. And he did it in English. So, the English of Macron, he speaks reasonably well. And I put him after China because he accepts this diagnosis. He notices it too. He talks about it. He agrees partially with or maybe he agrees totally, but he didn't say it. Carney was blunt. Carney told the truth. Emmanuel Macron, he came and he's, whining. That's what he's doing. But that's all France has been doing for decades, right? And trying to pretend that they're, I don't know, some sort of alternative in there. But Europe is frightened right now, and rightly so. But why? What did he say? He accepted this diagnosis, the doctor's diagnosis, but he rejects the prescription. China says preserve the system or it collapses, and Macron says, yeah, but the system already failing to protect us. It's not protecting us. He isn't ideological. He's afraid, and that's why you can say part of what he's saying is honest. He isn't pretending anymore either. This isn't the Macron of 5 or 7 years ago. He isn't selling globalization as destiny, right? He isn't pretending openness, He isn't pretending talking about values, democracy as shields, that save you from all the people thinking that, geez, why are they doing this so stupidly, so unfairly? Instead, he's like somebody who finally understands that the rules haven't helped him. They haven't stopped the tariffs, the speeches that everybody gives and finger points everybody. They haven't stopped the tanks in Ukraine. Good intentions, no matter if they're wrong or not, the world is full of them, but they don't stop Trump from coercing you or America from twisting everything in their favor and treating you like an evil stepchild. Macron did name the problem. He kept going to one idea. The world is sliding toward the law of the strongest. Now everybody's talking about it because Trump is being open about it. If he'd continued what the Biden era, the Obamas, the Clintons, what they all knew was we're the strongest. We've created these structures. Trump has blown them up. Whether you like it or not, this has world-level effects among your allies, okay? And I'm not saying wrong, right, and different. This is reality, okay? I'm trying to give you a reality check. He didn't say it rhetorically. He said it like a diagnosis. He's admitting that power politics are all we got. Economic tools are now weapons. Security guarantees are absolutely conditional. The U.S. didn't join in the NATO war games. Europe is exposed. He is dropping the pretense that post-Cold world order is still protecting the medium powers, because it isn't, just like Carney said yesterday. U.S. and China, Europe is caught in the middle. He did something unusual. He put Washington and Beijing in the same sentence, not as morality, but as structure. His argument isn't China bad, America good. It's Europe is being squeezed by both of them. China wants fair trade. America don't want fair trade. They want to dictate terms. And Trump is doing exactly that. U.S. tariffs, industrial policy, and using tariffs and financial policy and industrial policy as weapons, even against Europe, are undercutting European industry. Chinese scale, they talked about how big in sending their excess capacity outside of their own countries, and it's hurting the economy. So, well, you built that. You helped build that because the U.S. wanted you to. And now when the U.S. is pulling the rug out from under you, you can say that China's scale of power and output are threatening to overwhelm open markets. And so you can't have open market anymore. Everybody's closing their markets or making alternatives. This isn't anti-American. It's getting rid of the naivete and claiming that the U.S. is always going to protect us. Now, things go back to normal in 3 years. Normal for these people. Not normal for the world, but normal for these people, the globalist elitists. Hang on a second. Coffee time. That's good coffee. Remember Andy Griffith? I forget what his real name was, but Andy Griffith. That's who he was. So, this is where Macron did cross a line that Ursula von der Leyen, who hasn't said a word of truth, and except, we made a deal with Trump because, we had to. She's trying, that's what we're supposed to do. This is the global order. She's still got her head buried in the sand. And, this is what Brussels still avoids. But even Macron said it. And Macron's one of those head EU people. He openly argued that protection does not equal protectionism, that reciprocity isn't hostility. Strategic autonomy is survival, not ideology. He's talking survival. How is France and how is Europe going to survive the attacks from both China and the U.S.? He's scared. He talks about European preferences that they've had forever under the U.S. system. Carney talked about it yesterday, that they grew because they're right next to the United States. And they could always bank on the U.S. providing their defenses, and so they didn't have to put any money into their own defense. And they got to use it to create, liberal policies in Canada. Trade isn't defense. Anti-coercion tools he talked about. Industrial sovereignty. Think about that. Industrial sovereignty in France. They outsource to everywhere else in the EU, in the U.S., in China, everywhere. They're saying, he's saying quite plainly, if Europe stays open markets, while others are weaponizing trade, including the big players, the biggest players, like the U.S. and China, we're stuck in the middle and Europe dies slowly and politely. That isn't a radical thought. It's a late thought, that they, it should have known this years ago. It's been the same for a while now. And so, I find that rather interesting, okay? He still wants to claim the moral high ground, though. And here's where, there wasn't any talk about, what's really funny, very little talk about Ukraine. Nothing about Ukraine. This was all Trump, and then even quietly, they were talking about big powers. Nobody. This is an economic forum, by the way. This is for the global elites, polite society. You heard them clap at the Carney thing yesterday, if you paid attention, and Carney was blunt for Canada. Canada is going, hey, this is not the U.S. we used to know. And we can no longer bank on the U.S. Spreading the wealth, because they're not. Trump is weaponizing it. Why? Because Trump, he didn't say this. I'm saying this. Trump is also scared that the America power, the America is the only story in town, the only game in town. He's still trying to sell that crap because he sees the writing on the wall, too. India and China, they're very quiet. Nobody talked about India except Ursula von der Leyen, and very little about that. I didn't have time to look I was focusing on Europe because I wanted to hear about Ukraine. I wanted to hear about Greenland. I wanted to hear about all of that. And Macron ignored it. China didn't say a word about it. This is an economic forum. They're polite. They are talking about what everybody was coming to talk about, not about what Trump talked about. Trump talked about, I'm taking over the planet, live with it. Period. But nobody brought up the moral anchor, or very few anyway. Macron tried. He anchors his worldview into Ukraine because why? Ukraine is proving his thesis. He says international law was violated only by Russia. He didn't say anything about expansion of NATO eastward after we promised we wouldn't. He said guarantees failed. The guarantee that the U.S. would be there to help prop up Ukraine like it was under Biden and hundreds of billions of dollars, and Trump's figured all that. And Europe is now having to rearm itself after the fact, including NATO. And Ukraine is evidence. And by the way, Ukraine didn't even show up. Zelensky was on the thing, but he's dealing with serious problems at home. There is no power in Kiev. None. They're evacuating Kiev, friends and neighbors. I don't care if you believe that or not. Read it yourself. Go out to Telegram. Go out and watch what's happening. They're freezing their nuts off. That's what's happening. But Macron still wants to live with, we're defending Ukraine, right? He didn't mention it. He didn't spend a lot of time on this. And, in the absence of discussion about Ukraine is probably why the Z-Man didn't show up. He wasn't going to get any money. He knows he's on his last legs politically. He's got $90 billion he's waiting to get this year, and they're trying to figure out how to divvy it up, and all the oligarchs leave town. Ukraine's done. It's over. And he knows that. He's talking survival. And not only economic, he's talking whether he's going to survive. And that's what I think, right? And you don't have to believe me on that either. I got plenty of research on it, but you don't have to believe that. He's talking about Europe is now having to rearm to face the Russian threat that they created with the help of America. They created this threat by ostracizing Russia since the 90s, by treating it like, some sort of resource grab, just like the U.S. is doing. The U.S. lost that war. The Cold War, long term, is headed the other direction. You may think you won. Russia's stronger after all this. Talked about that. I talk about that frequently because this is mistaken policy. Nobody thinks long term. That's the biggest problem. America, and it doesn't matter, Trump, this year and, 3 years from now, whoever, it doesn't matter. It's all going to be the same. We'll go right back to it. Maybe it'll be a little quieter, less confrontational. Who knows? He talked about multilateralism, though. He did talk about alternatives. He talked about, multilateralism being rewritten. This is talk about BRICS, okay? He's talking about it being effective, not romantic. He doesn't reject multilateral policies like Trump does. Trump's going, we're still the only game in town. Screw you guys. Get on board or, we're going to drive over you, period. I'm in charge. Until he's not. It's a three-year victory lap for Donald Trump. Well, 4, but 1 year's already gone. This is he's still living in the fact that he lost 2020 election and didn't get to proceed with what he's doing. So he's blowing up the world order. Period. It's Donald Trump. Why? Because I'm bigger, badder, better than all of you assholes. That's what he's doing. And, that means America benefits greatly right now. No matter like it, dislike it, whatever, we're benefiting. But he's also creating exit strategies all over the place. They're running for the exits. Get out of here. Wait till we get to Alexander Stubb. Sorry about that. I need to keep moving. I want to make sure I get through this today, and there's a lot to talk about because we still have von der Leyen and Stubb before we get to the old Trumpster. So Macron argued for fewer illusions, kind of like Carney yesterday, but not so open about it, not so blunt. Carney was blunt, truthful, and I loved it. I thought it was great. That's why I played the whole thing for you yesterday, and because all these hadn't come out yet. I made sure to listen to all these. These were good, and some of them in English. Macron, his was in English. Von der Leyen, English. Stubb, he was a little hard to find, but he did an interview in English. That was nice, and it was a couple of hours. And he didn't give at least he hadn't yet given a full speech of his own. Trump, hour and 15 minutes, all on his own, and brutal. I hope JR plays the whole thing for you, or you should go out and listen to it yourself. I know JR will be spending a little time on it today. At least I hope he does. I'm pretty sure he will. This is about the biggest game in town right now, so I assume he will. But he's arguing for fewer illusions. Macron is more enforcement. How come we can't go back to the way it was? He wants the results as they used to be. He doesn't want to talk about multilateralism. He's talking about multilateralism as gaining muscle. What are we going to do? He's afraid. He's stuck in the middle of two hegemons, and he hasn't done anything to diversify, like Canada openly talked about yesterday. There's no diversification under these people are saying, what the hell are we going to do? Because he hasn't done anything. He's always a puppet, for the big boys. We can ride on the coattails of America. Why? Because we're Europe. We're the same. We're white folk. We're white European. We've been together for centuries. Well, it's done. Well, at least for now, until somebody else comes in. By the time you blow it all up, it's going to be real hard to rebuild. Real hard. Because people are remembering this. Okay? So what's the subtext for Macron? Europe is preparing for, not being prepared. They are preparing for, they recognize the writing on the wall. We're being abandoned. The U.S. is no longer going to carry us. Europe is rearming itself. Europe is reshoring itself. Europe is diversifying or trying to post the requirement that they buy all their liquid natural gas at double the price from America. They're diversifying. Europe is hedging on their alliances and creating alliances with China too. Why? Because Europe no longer assumes that the U.S. is reliable, because we're not. It's a power grab, and it's always been that way. And everybody talked about, well, gee, but what if they start to use it as a weapon like Trump is doing? What if we get another lunatic like him? This is what they're thinking. That's all I'm saying. They're diversifying. So what Trump is doing has consequences. You can talk about victory all you want, and, I tend to agree with you. But this is going to have, a long-term effect. Europe is shoring itself up. They're diversifying or trying on their energy, and they're hedging their alliances, hedging their bets, because the U.S. isn't reliable. It's not the institutional protection field that it used to be. And it doesn't mean that they're automatically involved in some sort of solidarity between similar interests, because U.S. is focused on America first, right? Scratchy in the throat. More coffee. Sorry. That's good coffee. Anyway, Macron's speech is a contingency plan spoken out loud. He's going, geez, what are we going to do? He's wringing his hands. And what's the core difference between him and China, right? And this contrast does matter, right? China believes that rules can still restrain power if the rules are defended. They didn't talk about, geez, we need to move into BRICS, even though they have. They didn't say we got to create regional powers, even though they have. They didn't talk about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they didn't talk about these alternative payment structures. They didn't talk about all the stuff is going. Macron believes this too, and he said it a little more than China. China's saying stop this before it's too late because everybody will be gone. And Macron is saying it might already be too late. Everybody better prepare anyway. Because these are realists, these are rich people, these are heads of retirement plans from Canada and U.S. and huge money. Where are we going to put it? How are we going to do it? Macron saying it's too late already. Prepare anyway. Neither one is crazy. China's not crazy. Macron's not crazy. They're just standing from a different perspective in different places on the map. So Macron. China is warning the system might collapse. Macron is acting like the system already failed, at least for him. And the difference is, between theories, which China is evoking, and memory, what's actually happened, okay? And so Macron is talking about institutional contradictions, because they exist, just like Carney, but not as far. He was still trying to be political about it. Economically, Carney was blunt. That was a great and powerful speech. It was a good one, and I played it all for you yesterday. Go back to yesterday's show and you can hear all of Carney. I'm not including Macron because he was hand wringing. He's worried, just like all the other ones. But I included him here because he represents at least half of Europe. Okay, they're all frightened. What about Ukraine? Nobody's talking about it anymore. Okay, let's talk about the EU itself. Now talk about the idiot bureaucrats at the top. And I apologize for calling names, but these people are not bright. Okay, they're living in some fantasy land world where everybody, I don't know what, is wearing rainbow colors or something. I don't know. Ursula von der Leyen at Davos was. I put her in the middle intentionally because we talked about China's restraint. Yesterday we talked about Carney's reality for being right next to the United States. Okay, now we're talking China, other side of the world, opposing matter. Then Macron and our alleged allies who are just frightened. And von der Leyen sounds like the standard bureaucratic institutional inertia. This isn't malice toward her, and she wasn't talking about malice toward the system. And although I sometimes say she's an idiot, she's not stupid. She's still stuck in bureaucratic process. Well, the process still working. The process, her whole thing was self-congratulatory. Not as bad as Trump, but she was congratulating herself, right? She's the institutions are still working, Macron, Carney. She didn't say anything. Her speech was empty, except, and I'll listen to this, okay? She talks about the mother of all deals. With who? India? That's her allegation, right? This is the mother of all deals, and it's an important deal. Okay, the EU, we're starting to work with India. Yeah, but with whose infrastructure? I mean, she doesn't even mention that they don't have the infrastructure to do all this. That we're no longer exchanging. There's even between Europe, India, China, there's a lot that isn't done in the old financial markets. It's not happening. It is collapsing as we are watching it. Most of us aren't watching it, but it's collapsing, okay? And she wants to talk about process as if it still works, but the power has already moved on, and everybody knows it. So this contrast, her speaking as if the system still works, it's annoying. This is an assumption. She's using assumptions that are no longer true. The U.S. is still going to protect us. She didn't say that, but she's assuming things that aren't, facts not in evidence is what you call that as a lawyer. Objection, Judge, assuming facts not in evidence. How in the hell are you going to base that on something that you haven't even talked about or that the fact doesn't exist? Nonsense. She speaks as if the system is still working, and it isn't working. Her language is full of what? Partnerships, new frameworks, new action plans. She's got her new checklist, right? She's got her new bureaucratic checklist. She's talking about the roadmaps and deals that are concluded that took 25 years. There were 25 years in the making. If we keep on doing it this way, the system will stabilize. What she's saying is hopefully we can make it 3 years till Donald Trump's no longer in office because he's blowing up the world, at least the system we're used to. The world is frightened of Donald Trump, okay? Maybe rightly so. You can believe any way you want to on that, but this is reality, folks. This is reality, and what the U.S. is doing is nothing but a power grab and a power. And wait till I get to him. I got to cruise, or I'm not going to get there, and I don't have time to stay later. And the show would quit recording if I did. I would like to do that. Maybe I can figure out how to keep recording if I go over for a little bit today, but I'm going to try not to. I want to see if I can get this in by the 9 o'clock. So anyway, her language is full of partnership, framework, action plans, checklists, roadmaps, deals that are concluded, and deals that are underway. We've been working on this for 25 years. Yeah, because you've had the U.S. backing in a lot of stuff, and now you got to do it on your own. The problem is none of these. It's not that these things are false, right? What she's saying, these are not false. She's still trying to keep the functioning, global elite, skewed system that Carney talked about, where the powerful quietly apply the rules differently depending on who you're applying the rules to, where we beat up on Russia and China without saying it out loud, and now we're saying it out loud, and Trump is now screw everybody, screw all of you guys. I might want to play that song A, B, C, D, E, F, U for you at the end. I'll see if I can find it, because that'll be the Trump signal to all of us, and I will do that. I'll try to find that, and I'll play it for you. But anyway, the deal count is not a strategy. How many deals you made? Okay, that's strategy, right? Trump's making deals. People will bail on him as soon as he's out of office. They'll restructure them or do whatever. He's doing some valuable things. You focus on the gas prices in America. Hell, just that most Americans will forgive and say, well, whatever he's doing, keep doing it. Keep on trucking, Donald Duck. Keep on going, because it's great for us. And frankly, it is. However, you're blowing up a system that you probably shouldn't be blowing up, and there are long-term consequences to this type of behavior. Saying what you say about Greenland, BS. Okay, doing what you did in Venezuela, BS. Blowing up boats in the ocean with not even, no trial, no nothing. Blaming it falsely on narco-terrorism is just the same as weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist in Iraq. Okay, and everybody knew it, by the way, that was up at the top of the power. The same old lies. It's just Trump is telling you the lies, but he did what do you call it? Change tack immediately after he did, and we'll get a little bit into that. Right afterward, he goes, "Well, we forced them, and then they agreed." Well, the force is not an agreement, and they will resist, especially after you leave. And that doesn't mean that the problems of Venezuela are all solved because he's stealing the oil. Anyway, and Greenland, you can't just go and take over Greenland. And Macron is asking, who's protecting us when deals that we've made in the past no longer do? Von der Leyen is saying, look how many deals we have, though. Look, we still got these deals. Those are totally different conversation. She didn't say anything. She never said, her speech was empty. All platitudes, all bureaucracy. One of the most telling parts about her remarks is what she refused to name, what she did not do. She did not call out U.S. trade coercion. She's one of the first to jump on board with it and get coerced because she knows she has to. She didn't address the tariffs directly. She didn't even talk about them. She didn't talk about sanctions being used as weapons, like Trump is planning to with tariffs. Those are basically sanctions against people that don't let him have Greenland. It's the exact same thing. She didn't acknowledge or say a word about Greenland or Venezuela. And she didn't speak about force as a policy tool. She didn't talk about it. Instead, she talked about the resilience of the Europeans. They don't have any resilience anymore. Their industrial capacity is gone. She talks about competitiveness, de-risk, sustainability, that language, the safe language of a bureaucrat. She talked about de-risk without saying who was taking the risk. Von der Leyen uses the term de-risking about China, but she avoids obvious follow-up question. De-risking from what? From tariffs? From sanctions? From unilateral policy shifts that happen by the powerful? From alliance volatility, especially when you don't like the guy on the top or the top guy isn't doing what you thought he would do? By refusing to talk about these things, she turns real concern into bureaucratic abstraction. She's nothing but a bureaucrat. That's all she is. Macron named the risk. Carney told you, hey, man, we see it, we identify it, and we're diversifying. Macron's like, what are we going to do? China warns about the damage that comes from this type of behavior, and von der Leyen is, shuffling paper. She's going, well, we bureaucrats are still here. We're still safe. And, why are we talking about this? She talked a little bit about Ukraine. She talked about the morality, the same old crap she's been spouting forever. Unity, values, a commitment to our allies. They're not allies. They are not allies. But unlike Macron, she doesn't draw the structural lesson. Law failed because power overruled the law. Power ignored the law. Instead, Ukraine is what she calls a test of resolve. We got to fight that big bad Putin. Putin is still the bad guy. Only now we have other bad guys on the planet that we just don't mention, right? So this is where Brussels and Paris diverge most clearly. Europe is, she's calling Europe the norm setter in a world that nobody gives a crap about that anymore. They just don't. Von der Leyen repeatedly framed Europe as the standard, the setter, a regulatory superpower. Bureaucracy, a model for everybody else. Bureaucracy will save you. It's like the show Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Do you remember the bureaucrats? That's a beautiful movie of bureaucracy. Ursula von der Leyen would be that big old bureaucrat in the ship, you know. I forget what they called them, but you should go watch that movie because it'll explain what's going on in Ursula von der Leyen's mind right now. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You should read all those books. They're pretty good. Restaurant at the End of the Universe, I think, is the last one. It's all pretty good stuff. Anyway, science fiction. But science fiction based upon reality of Europe and Ursula von der Leyen. Her vision made sense in a prior world, where access to Europe required compliance with the United States and NATO, where rules, alleged rules, carried penalties, but only for some, where markets, disciplined who got access to. But in a world of parallel supply chains, sanctions blocks, and coercive trade that we've seen over the last, certainly under Trump, both admins, and certainly under Biden, the ungifted, or maybe senile, who knows, but probably. But in a world of parallel supply chain sanctions and coercion, norms don't travel. Bureaucracy doesn't work. They need leverage. And the core problem is that she's governing yesterday's world. She's governing as if power is neutralized by process, by bureaucracy. Conflict is absorbed by these institutions. It isn't. Ukrainians are still dying for values that they don't share. And coercion is managed without confrontation. That's not true anymore. Davos itself is disproving that, if you listen to Davos. But I like economic discussion. Macron came armored. He's like, we got to do something. He doesn't have a plan, but he knows he's got to do something. China is restrained, as usual, and they're focused, and they're going to do the same thing because they have 10-year, 30-year, 50-year, 100-year plans that they follow. And they really do. I'm not making that up. Stubb is realistic. This is who we're going to get to next. And Trump, standard Trump aggression. And von der Leyen is, all about procedure. just follow this paperwork, fill out Form A, B, C, and the world will still work. Macron sounds like a man preparing for, impact. He's prepared for, missiles being launched against him. Von der Leyen's talking about missiles don't even exist. And we have institutions. What are you talking about, missiles? That's the difference between power thought and process thought. All she talks about is process. And we built all these systems. How come nobody's using them? She's the bureaucrat. So European states are rearming. China is warning quietly. Who's talking about realism? And I found a guy, and I like this guy. Trump likes him too. They're buddies now. Now they're golf buddies. And this is Alexander Stubb from Finland. Okay, and he was at Davos. He didn't have a speech yet, but he had an interview that was about an hour long, and I paid attention to that. And why does he matter? Finland's a small power, but they border Russia. They've lived next to this, just like Canada on the United States side. I filled in for you yesterday with Carney. Stubb is in Finland, and he's, working with Russia. He's on the Arctic Circle, he talks about some of this. And what he speaks is, Finland isn't theorizing about power. They're talking about the world that they live in, which they're living next to a great power of Russia. They closed their borders after they became a NATO thing, and they didn't need them for years. Hell, they had dual signs in Finland for decades that were both Russian and Finnish. There were so many Russians in Finland, and they've kind of stopped that, and they've hurt themselves by doing it. They're the most European, but they all got along fine. They lived without borders. They lived without armies confronting each other, fist held, against each other. But all that's changed when they convinced them that Ukraine was, so valuable, and all the lies that we've been put up. They quickly jumped into NATO because they believed the bullshit that nobody should believe, because it's very clear now what happened. Okay? They're talking about, he's speaking as someone who understands at the base level what exactly happened when rules failed, guarantees are no longer available, or they wobble, and geography geography. And geography doesn't give you the luxury of engaging in von der Leyen's moral theater. You know, he's calm. He doesn't evade. He's not a sales guy. He's not bombastic. He's calm, because panic isn't something that Finland's ever been able to do. You know, they've lived next to Russia. And if you believe that Russia is somebody that's trying to take over Finland, Russia could take over Finland. Russia didn't want to take over Ukraine. That's still the argument, okay? They didn't want to. We forced that upon them. We forced an existential threat, and then we failed because we didn't realize that Russia is still the same old Russia, that they don't put up with that. It'd be like coming into the Ozarks and saying, geez, you know, we're going to Californiaize you. That didn't work during COVID, and it wouldn't work physically. It just wouldn't. He doesn't argue about strength. He's arguing about misapplied strength, okay? And the way he frames it, security comes from world predictability. That's kind of Chinese, right? Predictability. Stability comes from the consent of the governed. The consent of them. That's stability, okay? Deterrence comes from being credible. Credibility. Not creating spectacles. He's saying things to Trump that people aren't listening to. This is a direct, quiet rebuke of Trump's style and his leverage politics, his businessman one-upsmanship, his art of the deal that everybody thinks of so positively isn't so positive. This is why his speech is so important. To add a voice like his, it's important to add. He's not, you know, wringing his hands. He's saying, you know, it'd be more effective if we all weren't so emotional, including old Trumpster, by the way, because Trump is definitely living in the past. You know, the past, the personal past, not the structural past, the personal past, and that's why he's doing what he's doing. I'm God now, and you folks are in trouble. I'm taking you down. That's what's happening. So where Trump frames Greenland as a strategic asset already of the U.S., a transaction, another transaction, or a problem to be solved by his unique brand of pressure and his brilliance, self-aware brilliance. You know, he is brilliant, and he tells everybody, I did that. Everybody else a bunch of idiots, and I did it. Stubb is reframing this correctly. It's a sovereignty and a security question, not a real estate negotiation. He's talking about Greenland. He's making the obvious but rarely stated point. You do not strengthen alliances by threatening their members. In Stubb's framing, Greenland isn't about ownership. It's about NATO cohesion, Arctic stability, most importantly, consent of the population, and respect for existing legal frameworks, because it matters. This does matter. And folks, it really does matter. It matters because once you normalize coercion and theft of resources, like we did in Venezuela, and we'll get to Trump here in a minute, because he just, yep, we did it. And after we took over, they made a deal. More people should do that. More people should understand. I'm going to blow you up and kidnap your president. You know, do what I say, or else. That's you want his speech in a nutshell. That's it. But let me get through Stubb first, because once you normalize coercion, once Trump normalized it, alliances are no longer alliances. They're a holding pattern until they exit, till people get out, like Canada, where they create something else, where they wring their hands like Macron, and who won't make a decision. They'll get rid of him. He's had too many governments. I can't imagine that he'll be, French are not too bright. And the systems aren't so smooth either. They're corrupt, just like here, ours is too, in America. Stubb is very visibly concerned, though, that headline-grabbing power plays, Greenland, Venezuela, trade threats, performative dominance. He's afraid that, this is crowding out the voice of Ukraine? How come our Z monster isn't here? He doesn't accuse Trump. He's warning everybody. His message is pretty simple. When attention is transactions, commitment is conditional. A commitment, if all we care about is today's transaction, there ain't no commitment tomorrow. Trust me, that's gone. Ukraine, for Stubb, isn't just a moral cause. It's a test case for whether international law has any teeth. And international law in Ukraine has no teeth. It certainly doesn't have any teeth in Greenland. Remember that. Remember I said that. Security guarantees do not mean anything in Ukraine or in Greenland. And whether the West can focus on what it feels important, democracy, the global world system, he's talking reality. And it's almost a parental sort of lecture. He sounds less like a politician and more like somebody reminding the room of consequences. Nobody's talking about consequences with Trump. Nobody. Stubb did a little bit. He's talking about NATO law, the danger of improvising on the law. He repeatedly returns to process, but not in the Brussels. For him, NATO process is not a bureaucracy, like von der Leyen says. Law is not a virtue signaling. Law is the law. He's more of a realist. I like listening to him. Procedure is how small and medium powers survive living next to giants. The same. You have to be able to rely on the system, and nobody relies on the system, and the system is departing quickly. Von der Leyen treats process as comfort. That's comfort food for her. Stubb treats process as what saves you. What's supposed to save us is process, but the process doesn't exist. Von der Leyen says the process is still there. Stubb says it's not working. Macron says, oh, geez, what are we going to do? It's already collapsed. Improvisation for Finland isn't bold. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. We live next to Russia. If you think Russia's taken over the world, the U.S., you're not helping us in Greenland. This isn't helping us. So why Stubb is the anti-Trump without saying anything anti-Trump? He doesn't insult Trump. He doesn't mock him. He doesn't even question his legitimacy. Instead, he does something even more devastating. He shows that there are ways to be strong without being imperial, without being colonial. His worldview says that you can deter against things without humiliation, without takeover, without threat. You can protect interests without forcing obedience upon the rest of the world. That's not weakness. That's maturity. That's kind of like I'm talking about. I don't believe this will work long term. What Trump is doing long term, this is horrible. This is not good. Okay? This is maturity. Finland is maturity. They're talking about, hey, reality does exist, and we live right next to it. And we have had to deal with each other, and we've had a nice, friendly relationship. And U.S., you're going to blow this crap up even further. He's lecturing without naming Trump specific. He never says it out loud. If the U.S. starts behaving like every other great colonial power in history, those in the middle, the smaller allies, are going to plan accordingly, like Canada is doing. Doesn't mean that he's rebelling. It means that he's hedging. And hedging is the beginning of fragmentation. Fragmentation, that's already going on because the rules never apply. The rules don't apply because you are the power. And it's always been that way. Only Trump is far more obvious about it. He's gone, well, sorry, I'm the king. And the king doesn't have to do any dishes. That's for the rest of you schlubs. Get out there and do it. Or the rest of you stubs, as the case may be. So this gets us to the pivot point, right? Alexander Stubb doesn't talk like a man that's trying to win. He's talking like a man trying to survive to get to the next to the power, from being next to power without, offending the other big power. And that might be the most realistic voice at Davos this year, except for Carney, who we talked about yesterday. So you just heard the voices of restraint, of fear, of denial, and a realist. And then there came Donald Trump. This is important, okay? I'm not asking you, I'm wanting to be consistent with what I always talk about. Security realism. I don't want to be radical. I want to talk about the same logic that governed arms control throughout the Cold War and the post-Cold War. My core premises, if you listen to me regularly, you know that Russia was explicitly told NATO would not expand eastward on many occasions. Those assurances were political, not contractual, which is exactly the problem. NATO expansion ignored Russia's stated security doctrines repeatedly and publicly claimed by Russia. Ukraine is the tripwire. They aren't the cause of this. It's not. They're just the tripwire. They're the result of all of this, of the bad 30 to 50 years of past U.S. idiocy and Western completely. War is the tragedy of it all, but causation does matter. If you're in Russia, causation is the game in town. But in saying Russia bad without discussing NATO expansion is, that's malpractice in reality. That's false narrative. It's bullshit. This is I speak from a position of realism, true facts, not made up crap. Of democracy in Ukraine. I'm a realist. It's the most corrupt country in the world. Period. End of sentence. And it's uncomfortable to say if you're in the West. Trump is saying it now. Ukraine is not winning. Western casualty narratives are always selective, and nobody talks about it. So they're here. Stubb doesn't blame Russia. He avoids history of NATO. He's speaking from Finland being right next to Russia and how well they've gotten along in the past and how NATO has forced them to do other things, but they chose a side, right? And now there's no longer any sides because the U.S. is blowing all that up. Nobody can count on the U.S. anymore because of Donald Trump, okay? Russia has been very clear since the 90s about what NATO expansion would mean. They've been very clear, and we ignored it. And I mean the West. It wasn't me. It wasn't us, listeners of this show. It's the West. We made assurances, not guarantees, and then we go, what? We didn't have a contract. We got what? German reunification, and then we kept moving eastward anyway. We lied repeatedly. That doesn't justify war, but it does explain it. It makes sense. I mean, pretending that Russia has failed, and everybody keeps talking, Russia's failed in everything they try to do. My ass, go to Ukraine and tell me that Russia's failing. Go there. I mean, I'm not there, but I'm telling you, watch Telegram for a while, okay? Go pick even the Ukrainian channels in Telegram. You get some realism there. The propaganda machine is slowing down. And more truth is coming out because why? The collapse is imminent. They're trying to figure out who's getting the last $90 billion and how they're going to divvy it up. That's what's happening, period. And how they walk away. Who walks away and, the poor just end up under a different, the masses like the rest of us end up under a different deal, right? Trump doesn't care anymore. He's on to something else, and he blames the Z monster anyway. So let's get to Trump because I only got about 18 minutes left and not quite enough time. And I want to get to Trump because it's important. Trump, after Stubb. Let's stop for a minute because we've heard four different reactions: China, Macron, Ursula, and Stubb. Yesterday we heard Carney do something. None of them quite did the same. He admitted that the rules-based order worked only because everybody pretended it did. And that once the strong stop pretending, U.S., the system is gone. So at this point, we aren't arguing about whether the old world order is under stress. Everybody at Davos has agreed upon that, even if they don't say it the same way. The real question is how power behaves when rules are gone. Which brings us to Donald Trump, because he's the first American president in decades who didn't just bend the rules or selectively apply them. He openly treats force as the policy. This isn't accidental. It's not rhetorical. It is the new system. I'm the power. Get in line. Okay? And now this is absolutely true, and why Trump had to come last. And I'll have to get through this somewhat quickly, but his speech was the longest. If I started with him, the rest of it sounds, I don't know, that he's the consequence of all these other things. Trump isn't reacting to the collapse of the old world order. He's accelerating it. He's privatizing it. So Trump's core worldview, let's get to that. Trump's worldview is he doesn't speak the language of systems. He's talking the language of leverage, of real estate transactions. Everything flows through him, period. Success of the world, that's personal. Failure belongs to everybody else. Compliance, you do what I say, that's proof of your strength. You realize that I'm God. Resistance is disobedience, and disobedience isn't going to work for you. That's what they did by not showing up to NATO exercises this month. Institutions don't constrain behavior. They are obstacles in his path. Treaties aren't stability mechanisms. Those are bad deals other people made that I can ignore. Allies are not partners. They are dependents upon you. Okay? That's the way Trump frames it. This isn't a misunderstanding of diplomacy as it existed for the last 50 years. It's rejection. Right? Trump repeatedly frames global relations as a series of transactions. That's all it is. These are transactions to him. He's winning. He's art of the dealing. He's who wants to be a millionaire. That's it. Tariffs are punishment. Access to our market is a reward. It's a carrot for you. Threats, that's the way he negotiates. That's his negotiating bullshit, by the way, negotiating style. This is the position-based bargaining I talked about yesterday. This isn't in America's interest. I talk about interest-based bargaining. This is not it, okay? And he is not, he's a positional bargainer, period. He sets a position 10 steps ahead, knowing he'll accept something less. Carney warned about this yesterday. When economic tools or weapons, cooperation is contingency planning. Trump treats contingency as success. Venezuela, the problem of precedent. Trump's Venezuela rhetoric matters a great deal, okay? Far more than most Americans realize, in fact. He's framing it as enforcement, discipline, and victory. Nobody else could do what we did. Why is it that nobody else can ever do what we did? That's nonsense, People could. And he's talking about enforcement, discipline, victory plans, but the world hears something else. If you don't comply, we're going to take what we need anyway and justify it later. That just doesn't apply to adversaries. That applies to everybody. This is where Trump isn't weakening the alternatives. He is validating them, making them valid. Greenland has gone from an alliance to an asset. Greenland's the cleanest example of his worldview that collides with reality. He said, Greenland's a strategic necessity for the United States. The rest of you guys are idiots. The only guy who could do this is me. This is my economic plan, and, you don't, comply. You don't own that anyway. We should have never given it back. He was... The way he talks, it's like, who the hell is this guy? He's nuts. And nuts in a good way, but he's friggin' nuts. And everything is because of Donald Trump. You want success? Donald Trump. You want failure? Go talk to Joe Biden. And he still brings him up. Stubb told you the truth about why the framing, why this logic fails. Because alliances are built on consent of the governed. What about that? What about Venezuela? That was coercion. Security is supposed to be collective. It isn't. Coercion inside alliances destroys trust. So they're still trying to say, look, we have these alliances and you're ignoring them completely. What are you going to do when Article 5 has to be used in Greenland? They're not going to do it anyway. Screw them. That's Trump. And Trump boasts about he personally lowered the gas prices. And Americans, we feel that immediately. We see that. And you know what? I grant him that success. When you steal 50 billion barrels of gas, trust me, you can push the gas prices down in America. But that's a short-term win. And it doesn't replace long-term trust of the United States. It doesn't do it. Energy leverage doesn't replace energy stability. What we have done, which I believe we are deeply involved in blowing up Nord Stream 2, as America, has never been rectified, nor will it be. Instead, we're forcing more. You're going to buy LNG from us, to hell with going through Turk Stream through Greece or anywhere else. To hell with everything, shutting down those pipelines through Ukraine. Because now you're buying from us at double the cost, Europe. This is good for us. Screw you. That's Trump. This is good for us. Screw you. This isn't sustainable leadership. It's not. It's consumptive leadership. That's what it is. He's abandoning treaties. He's inviting the very exit. He's telling you can't. His abandonment of arms control agreements, trade frameworks, international organization is not neutrality. It's a signal to adversaries, build your own systems. To allies, protect yourselves. To middle powers, hedge now, Canada. Go to China, make some deals. China heard this. Europe hears this. Canada hears this. Finland is hearing this. This is why alternatives are accelerating under Trump. They're not doing it despite Trump. They're doing it because of Trump. And that's the problem with narcissism as the governing model. His self-congratulation isn't a personality quirk. It's the way he governs. When all success is personal, when all failure is external, when any resistance is betrayal, then policy is improvised. It's not a strategy. This is what Carney meant by rupture of the system. This is what Stubb fears. This is what China has been preparing for decades, at least, well, certainly since Trump won, and absolutely since Trump too, all through Biden, they did. And China's quiet about it, but trust me, they're prepared. And this is what Europe is attempting to hedge against and what Macron is hand-wringing about. Trump isn't ending globalism. He's fragmenting faster. This is, he's privatizing it. He's privatizing globalism. The new world order is Trump, okay? He's privatizing it, he's personalizing it, and he's making all the exit strategies rational. That isn't anti-American. It's not even anti-Trump. It's an analysis of systems. When systems no longer exist, Trump isn't making no bones about it. Screw your systems. I ain't working on it. I ain't doing it. Hell with you guys. I'm God, not you. And he's blunt. I mean, his speech, I listened to it all. Every word of it. Interesting. I would like some different commentary, But Trump believes force produces obedience. That's what he says. It's what he said about, certainly about Venezuela. He's talking about it now. You're going to comply or I'm just stealing it. It's mine anyway. He's already justifying it. It's already mine anyway. Screw you guys. Get your dog sleds out of there. I own that. That's mine. We never should have given it to you anyway. Everybody before me, every president before me is a moron. Every president before me is stupid. We should have taken Greenland ages ago. I mean, what kind of arrogance is that? Mine. That's it. He's the biggest bully in the what do you call it? Daycare. He's the biggest bully in the daycare. My toy, my this. He's still talking. He who dies with the most toys wins. That applies to him. That's what it should be on the back of his boat. I saw that on the back of the boat, back of a boat, I think here at the lake. years ago. He who dies with the most toys wins. That could sum up Trump for you. And before he dies, he wants to win. He wants to control the risk board. That's all he's doing. He's controlling, America. I'm going to make America great again. And how do we make America great again? We roll over you. Not with tanks. We roll over you from space. We shut off your access to everything. Screw all of you. You either become our vassals, you become our colonies, you support the head, screw the rest. Don't make alternative stuff. We'll punish you. And the punishment ain't working. So what's he doing? He's consolidating his power into the Western Hemisphere, just like the risk board. All he's doing is playing a game of risk. That's what's going on, friends and neighbors. And I am offended somewhat by it. I think it's short term, and it's going to create many of the things that we're frightened of. Frightened isn't the right word. Many of the things that we're concerned about, they're being created even now by all of these. These people are not inconsequential people that we're speaking at this economic forum. This is the power of money that people were talking about. This is an important meeting in Davos. The notable absence of Ukraine and talking about Ukraine. The backroom deals with Kirill Dmitriev and the negotiators that have nothing to do with Ukraine. There's no Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky was supposed to be there, and last I heard, he bailed, that he didn't come because Kiev is under serious problems. It's freezing cold over there, and there's no gas, there's no electricity, and Russia has knocked out all of their power grids. It's not good. And he, for the first time, didn't travel to get a word in with Trump because it doesn't do any good anymore. Trump wants him to, and Trump's team is saying, look, capitulate, you little prick. Capitulate. Do something. You have lost. Not my war, Joe Biden's war. Would have never happened if I was president. I disagree with that. As long as everything was, if all other things were equal, Trump would have still stood up. Putin would have still stood up. It'd just be a different, maybe a different result. Trump is much more brutal about it. So Trump is the gravitational mass of all of this right now. And at Davos, he was not subtle a bit. He was not restrained, and he is no longer pretending that some sort of rules-based system works. He's saying, I am the rules. Follow my new rules, because this is what I created, right? And so this is it. Trump Unchained. We're talking about Trump Unchained. And Trump believes force produces obedience, and the world has learned that it's producing exit strategies. And Davos this year was not a debate. It was a warning to everyone. And Trump spoke it loudest of everyone. So I've compared all of these speeches. I've explained why alternative structures and pathways are growing so fast under this coercion. And this is strong stuff. China warning, Macron wringing its hands. These are bad deals for them. Very bad. Mark Carney, I still say you should go listen to him. Trump didn't cause the collapse of the old world order, but he's accelerating it into a force as policy, leverage as entitlement, and obedience as a proof of strength. That'll work in the short term. It always does, but it won't build loyalty, stability, or permanence. Force produces compliance. but it also produces exit strategies. And I hope you Americans see that. This isn't left versus right. It's not about Trump versus Biden. It's not about loving or hating America. It's about whether power understands its own limits. And every great power that forgets that lesson eventually will relearn it, often the hard way. Davos this year didn't give us a new world order. It shows us that other people understand that the old one is gone and that a replacement is inevitable. That's what we talked about today. As always, I question everything. I am Samuel Trapp. I will be here Monday with more excitement for you on International Flavor and Damn Radio. Listen to all my other shows at internationalflavor.com. I truly hope you do. And enjoy your Thursday and your weekend. And I will see you Monday.